Today we are going to talk about a newly released literary thriller film called The Boundless Warrior, starring the charming and dangerous Mia Gauss. This film is filled with a large number of secondary images, reminding the old Iron Watchers to control their emotions. The story takes place in an island nest called Taka. After hearing about the beautiful scenery here for a long time, the male lead James takes his wife on vacation. Looking at the distant beach, his wife is eager to go and take a look. Then the two of them came to the vicinity of the hotel for a tour and were quickly attracted by the local customs and performances. At that moment, a woman named Yuju walked over and said she was a loyal fan of James. Originally, James was a somewhat famous writer. He was surprised to encounter the voice of a foreign country, and he was also a beautiful female fan. That evening, Yuju and her husband invited James and his wife to dinner. Through their conversation, they learned that Yuju and his wife are both actors by profession and they come here for vacation every year. When it comes to the difficulty of making a living as a writer, James's wife joked that she is a wealthy woman and her husband only needs to rely on him firmly. This sentence may seem like a joke, but it sounds very uncomfortable to James. However, in fact, it is true that James now holds the title of writer thanks to his wealthy and powerful father behind his wife. At this moment, Jade Pig's head came to understand the gaze, but James felt an inexplicable restlessness after seeing it. The next day, two newly acquainted families went on an outing together and rented a sports car from the hotel. It has to be said that the scenery in Taka is very beautiful, and the places along the way where the fundraising is taking place are all breathtaking. Not long after, I went to a mountain spring to rest, and the lazy sunshine was very enjoyable. At this moment, Yuju cast a special gaze again, and James instantly understood the meaning behind it. They all knew that a burning desire was about to erupt in their hearts. Time quickly arrived at night, and the four people who were a day late began to return to the hotel. Perhaps it was because there were no street lights in the island country at night. James, who was responsible for driving, suddenly saw a dark figure. The sudden car accident was frightening, and James, who was frightened, immediately thought of calling the police. Yuju scolded and advised loudly, saying that running while no one was around was the best strategy. So, a few people got into the car and chose to escape. The next day, James was awakened by a knock on the door. When he opened the door, he was momentarily stunned. It turned out that Taka's police had found the door. James can't guess who took the blame, but it's no longer important at this point. However, what happened next overturned his understanding. The sheriff told him that the laws here are very strict, and the crime of hit and run falls under the category of death penalty. This sentence was like a thunderbolt that scared James to almost wet his pants. The sheriff continued, "There is still room for easing, on the condition that as long as you provide enough money, we can help you create a replica, and then he will bear all the crimes for you, including walking to the guillotine." Such an incredible proposal made James a bit confused, but he still hesitated and agreed to this method. Subsequently, Yida's thick banknotes were taken out as chips, and James, who was in a mellow state, was also taken to a place. At the signal of the staff, James walked into the so-called replication system manufacturing room. With a chaotic wave of light and shadow, something magical happened. When James woke up, his wife told him that the double was ready and went to the designated room to check. The sheriff said that the replica is the same as the body, including their memory and thinking. As the conversation changed, the sheriff said that when the replica was executed, the James couple must be present to watch. This is the rule. James didn't care what the sheriff said, but was very curious about the horrific scene of a replica like himself that frightened James. He hurriedly bid farewell to the sheriff and left the room. A few hours later, in an open and huge warehouse, James's substitute was tied to a pillar. Although his appearance is identical to his true self, the result is that he has to bear all the sins and accept the death penalty. At the same time, in the stands, the James and his wife were looking at everything with shock on their faces. The poor double is also a flesh and blood body. At the moment of death, he was still pleading with his wife on the stands. This scene deeply shocked him. Although he knew that the person being punished was not his husband, his heart was still like a knife cutting. As the double on the execution ground collapsed, James sitting on stage revealed a hint of eerie laughter. Afterwards, the sheriff brought over the ashes of the stunt double and offered to take them as a souvenir. Such a despondent thing made the James couple completely lose the mood for vacation. My wife said she wanted to leave here overnight, but James found out that his passport was missing. Late at night, the wife cried and complained that her husband was too cold-blooded. Although the other person was just a stunt double, her husband acted without any waves. Depressed, James arrived at the hotel front desk, wanting to know when his room card would expire. The front desk said it could be renewed indefinitely, but 10 days later, due to the rainy season, they would have to stop operating, which means everyone's room cards would expire at that time. At this moment, Yuju appeared in the hall. He saw James's unhappiness and wanted to invite him to his cocktail party to relax. Faced with the seductive gaze of the jade bead, James agreed without even thinking about it. Upon arriving at the presidential suite where Yuju is located, James was honored to have seen the younger generation and instantly felt that his identity had also been elevated. At this moment, he learned an astonishing fact, which was that everyone present had been sentenced to death, and then he used money to buy stunt doubles and survived. James is confused. What if he gets replaced by a double? One of the billionaires explained that there's no need to worry, because what's going on here? The so-called noumenon and replica are exactly the same, so you only need to realize that you are still alive. As everyone's topic became more and more lively, someone proposed an exciting game, which is to rob the owner of this hotel. Thinking that Taka's double policy can be used multiple times, the humanity that has lost legal constraints is being infinitely magnified at this moment. In order to integrate into the circle of the wealthy, James also decided to participate in their game. Subsequently, everyone infiltrated the hotel warehouse and stole a batch of masks. From the moment they put on the masks, everyone's inner self was completely released, and the dark side of human nature was also completely released. On a dark and windy night, the wealthy broke into a villa in search of excitement. Not long after, the boss and his family were tied up. At this moment, the bodyguards from the villa rushed into the room and engaged in a fierce gunfight with everyone. Because the number of billionaires was relatively large, they quickly took control of the situation. This incident was indeed quite exciting, but as expected, all participants were also arrested at the police station. I thought I could still escape punishment through a stunt double, but the sheriff said that this incident was too heinous, and even if I paid a lot of money, it would be of no use. Everyone was dumbfounded when they heard this. The sheriff didn't scare them, and then the wealthy were pinned to the execution ground. At this moment, James was deeply regretful. He wanted to make the final struggle, but he still had his throat cut on the spot and received a boxed lunch. As the executioner's hands rise and fall, the story seems to be coming to an end by this point. However, at this moment, there was a burst of joy in the stands, and it turned out that all the executed people were stunt doubles. James sat in the crowd, as if he had already assimilated into this circle and felt the beauty that this country had brought to him. Subsequently, James returned to the hotel with the second jar of souvenirs. His wife immediately understood what was going on and said she wanted to leave the island immediately. Obviously, she didn't care about her husband anymore. In the evening, James's wife's departure left him feeling dejected and his mood plummeted to the extreme. After learning about it, Yuju rushed over to comfort and hug James in her arms. That night, James and Yuju finally released themselves. From this day on, James began to indulge in the extravagance of drinking, eating meat, and phosphorus. The degree of criticism even made him forget that he had no laws, no morals, and a complete freedom. The highest level of indulgence in life should not be more than that. Someone has proposed a more exciting gameplay, which is to tie the sheriff over and play around. The situation went very smoothly, and they caught the sheriff as planned. After returning to the hotel, a group of people began to wave recklessly, punching and kicking the sheriff. At this moment, James was even more proud. He crazily beat the sheriff and even started urinating at him. This operation immediately drew cheers from the wealthy. One of them made James's happiness reach its limit, but the smile of the jade bead appeared meaningful. When the sheriff's hood was taken off, James instantly became shocked and speechless. Yes, the person lying on the ground is not a sheriff, but a replica of themselves. This scene is filled with immense irony, and James feels as embarrassed as if he has been stripped of his clothes in public. I thought I had assimilated into the circle of the wealthy, but ended up finding myself their plaything. In a panic, James ran into the room upstairs and took out his passport. It turned out that the passport was not lost at all, but was secretly hidden by him. The next day, James decided to leave here and return to his previous mundane life. However, the car to the airport had not yet traveled much when Yuju chased after a group of wealthy people. Thinking of the humiliation she had suffered last night, James felt ashamed and didn't want to pay attention to it anymore. At this moment, Yuju didn't let go of him and directly fired a gun. Lanting got off the car, and the wealthy parents shouted for James to get off because they hadn't had enough fun yet. "What are you doing in the chain?" Helpless James had no choice but to get off the car and follow them on with 100 steps. On the way back, Yuju, who had already revealed his true face, told the truth. It turned out that he had never read James' book and was not a fan either. Everything was done to guide James into the circle and make him a plaything for many wealthy people. Faced with the humiliation of being naked with a pig's wing, James also realized at this moment that he was not a fraud, but just a useless person who relied on his wife to survive. "The reason why I fell into the trap of the jade bead is all due to my desire to satisfy my degraded self-esteem and my hypocritical and dignified desire to achieve success and fame." At this moment, the bottle of jade pearl suddenly slipped off, and James took the opportunity to restrain the other party. The wealthy were frantically struggling and amused by him, all of whom wanted to come forward and ridicule them. Unable to bear the repeated humiliations, James got up and ran towards the nearby forest. "Come!" Yuju calmly fired a few shots and quickly hit James, falling to the ground. When a dazzling light came, the time had come to night, and James was surrounded by rich people. Someone let out a dog, which was exactly a person, a copy of James. Yuju said, "If you still want to live, just kill the dog in front of you." James hesitated when he received the dagger. It was different from sitting in the stands. How could he possibly kill himself? Kill the dog? James wanted to hesitate again, but Yuju aimed his gun directly at him. "Obviously, if you want to survive tonight, you must be obedient and obedient." Due to helplessness, James had to engage in a battle with his own replica. After a fierce struggle, James pressed the replica under his body and fiercely attacked it. At this moment, he had completely surrendered to the wealthy because Yuju walked over and held James in her arms, as if soothing her pet. A few days later, the rainy season in Taka began to fall, and the hotel officially closed. Everyone had to end their vacation and return to their respective countries. James didn't buy any specialty, but took 3 identical souvenirs with him. On the bus heading to the airport, the wealthy seemed to have returned to normal, but their expressions seemed as if nothing had happened. At this moment, James was very puzzled whether his experience was real or a complete dream. When preparing to register at the airport, the Yuju couple bid farewell to James and expressed their hope of meeting each other again next year. Watching the departure of the Jade Pearl couple, James fell into endless contemplation. Suddenly, he felt that everything around him was fake, and he was a mentally ill person who was like a fake. After all the flights had left, James chose to stay and returned to the closed hotel. He found a chair and sat down, perhaps contemplating the true purpose of his trip or whether he was a replica. At this point, the film ends. The film is translated as boundless swimming pool, probably to express when indulgence becomes a habit. A pitiful soul can only be trapped in desire and can never come ashore again.